Right in the middle of Christmas dinner, my own son stood up from the table, pointed at me with contempt, and yelled in front of the entire family that I was a useless old man, that I didn't deserve to be there. Nobody defended me. I only heard laughter as I left my own home, humiliated. My name is Arthur Quinn. I am 67 years old, and throughout my life, I believed that a father's love was unconditional and unbreakable. I believed that the sacrifices I made for my family would be remembered with gratitude, that the sleepless nights working in my woodworking shop in Springfield, Illinois, would mean something to my children. But that night, December 24th, 2024, I discovered I was completely wrong. Christmas had always been sacred to me. Ever since I was a child in the East Side neighborhood, I remember how my father, may he rest in peace, would gather the whole family around a humble table, but one full of love. We didn't have much money, but we had respect, we had dignity. And when I started my own family with Sophia Miller, the woman who has been by my side for 43 years, I swore I would keep that tradition alive. That year, I prepared dinner with more dedication than ever. I wanted everything to be perfect. My son, Mark Quinn, 39, was coming with his wife, Christine Myers, and my granddaughter, Paige, who had just turned 14. 6 months had passed since we last saw each other. 6 months of brief calls, constant excuses, broken promises. But I kept hoping, kept believing that things would change. I spent all day on the 23rd preparing the roasted lamb, the recipe my mother taught me over 50 years ago. I cleaned the house from top to bottom. I set the table with the embroidered tablecloth that Sophia saved for special occasions. I placed the candles I bought at the local farmer's market. Every detail mattered. Every gesture was an offering of love for a family that, unbeknownst to me, still didn't value me. Sophia watched me silently as I worked. I knew that look of hers after so many years together. It was a mix of tenderness and worry. She knew something I didn't want to admit, that Mark had changed, that he was no longer the boy who played with me in the workshop, that something had broken between us and might be beyond repair. "Arthur, don't try so hard," she told me that afternoon as I polished the silverware we inherited from my parents. "You know how Mark has been lately. I don't think he'll appreciate all this." "It's Christmas, Sophia," I replied without looking up. "It's a time to be together. I'm sure things will get better when we're all reunited." How naive I was, how blind I had been for so long. Mark arrived past 8 p.m. on the 24th, almost an hour late. He didn't apologize, didn't even greet me with a hug, just a dry nod as he walked straight into the living room, looking at his cell phone as if it were the most important thing in the world. Christine gave me 2 cold kisses on the cheeks, and Paige, my sweet granddaughter, was the only one who hugged me with genuine affection. "Grandpa, everything smells so good," Paige said with a smile that reminded me why I kept fighting. "Thank you, Princess. Everything is prepared with a lot of love," I replied, stroking her brown hair. We sat at the table near 9. I had placed Mark in the place of honor, directly opposite me. Sophia was on my right, Christine on my left, and Paige next to her father. I began to serve the lamb, with hands that trembled slightly, not from old age, but from contained emotion. From the very first moment, I noticed the tension. Mark looked at his plate with disgust, as if he were evaluating food from a cheap restaurant. Christine avoided my gaze. Only Paige seemed genuinely happy to be there. "The lamb is a little dry, isn't it?" Mark commented after the first bite, his voice laden with disdain. "It's perfect, son," I said calmly, though I felt a pang in my chest. "It's the same recipe as always." "Well, maybe you should change the recipe. Times change, father." Sophia squeezed my hand under the table. It was her way of telling me to keep calm, not to let Mark's words affect me. But each comment was like a small knife, cutting a little deeper. Throughout the dinner, Mark continued with his hurtful observations. The table was poorly set. The candles smelled too strong. I had taken too long to serve. Each criticism disguised as a casual comment. Each word designed to make me feel small. I responded with patience, with that serenity I had learned from my father. But inside, something was changing. A strange clarity began to settle in my mind. I started observing not only what Mark said, but how he said it. The gestures of contempt, the looks of superiority, the way he treated me as if I were a nuisance in my own home. And then came the moment that would change everything forever. It was almost 10 p.m. when Sophia brought dessert to the table. She had prepared her famous homemade pecan pie, the one that took days to make and had always been Mark's favorite when he was a child. She placed it in the center with a hopeful smile, perhaps seeking a positive reaction from our son. Mark didn't even look at it. "I don't want dessert," he said dryly, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. "Besides, we're running late. We have to leave soon." "Leave? But we just finished dinner," I replied, feeling disappointment settle in my throat. "I thought we'd spend the night together like before." "Like before," Mark repeated with a bitter laugh. "Father, I'm not 12 anymore. I have commitments, a real life. I can't stay here wasting my time with obsolete traditions." Wasting my time. Those words echoed in my head like a gong. I looked at Sophia, whose face reflected deep sadness. I looked at Paige, who watched her father with evident confusion. I looked at Christine, who studied her painted nails as if they were the most fascinating thing in the universe. "I understand," I finally said, keeping my voice firm. "But at least try the pecan pie. Your mother worked 3 days preparing it." "I already told you I don't want it," he replied, raising his tone. "Are you deaf as well as slow?" The silence that followed was deafening. Paige let out a small gasp of surprise. Christine finally looked up, but said nothing. Sophia squeezed her napkin until her knuckles turned white. I simply nodded. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg him to stay. Something inside me was transforming. A kind of silent awakening that I didn't fully comprehend yet. I started clearing the empty plates, taking them to the kitchen, with calm, measured movements. "Let me help you, Grandpa," Paige said, getting up quickly. "No, Princess, stay with your parents," I replied, with a smile I struggled to produce. "I'll take care of it." As I washed the dishes in the kitchen, I heard fragments of conversation from the dining room. Mark's voice dominated everything, talking about business, about money, about investments. He spoke of figures, opportunities, material things, never feelings, never family, never gratitude. I then remembered a conversation we had exactly 2 years ago. On Christmas of 2022, Mark had just opened his business consulting firm in Chicago and needed initial capital. He came to visit me one November afternoon, nervous and full of ambitious plans. "Father, I need $50,000, he told me directly, without mincing words. "It's a unique opportunity. I have contacts, I have experience, I just need the money to get started." $50,000 was practically all I had saved after 40 years working as a carpenter. Money I had saved penny by penny, thinking of my retirement, of helping Sophia if she needed it, of leaving something for Paige when she was older. But he was my son, my only son, and when he looked at me with those eyes full of determination, I couldn't refuse. "I'll give it to you," I told him, "but I need you to promise me that we'll remain a family, that you won't forget us when you succeed." "Of course, Father," he replied, hugging me tightly. "I'll never forget what you do for me, I promise." How empty those promises sound now, how fragile those oaths, made in times of need, turned out to be. I transferred the full amount to him in December 2022. Mark cried with happiness that day. He called me the best dad in the world. He promised to repay every last cent with interest. During the first few months of 2023, he called me every week, telling me about his progress, his first clients, his achievements. Then the calls spaced out, once every 2 weeks, once a month, and finally, almost nothing. When I asked him about the money in June of that same year, he responded with irritation. "Father, are you really going to pressure me for money? I'm building something important. Have patience." Patience. I had always had patience with Mark. Patience when he failed at classes in college. Patience when he changed majors 3 times. Patience when he married Christine. Even though Sophia and I had doubts about that relationship, infinite patience from a father who only wanted to see his son happy. I returned to the dining room with a pitcher of fresh water. Mark was still talking, now about a new real estate project he was evaluating in Los Angeles. His eyes gleamed when he spoke of money, of properties, of numbers. I never saw them gleam like that when he spoke of Paige, of her childhood, of her dreams. "And how's your company doing, son?" I asked with genuine curiosity as I filled the glasses. "Good, Father. Very good, in fact," he replied, without looking at me. "We invoiced over $200,000 last year." "I'm very glad. So I suppose you'll soon be able to repay those $50,000 I lent you." The atmosphere changed instantly. Christine coughed uncomfortably. Paige looked at her plate. Mark gave me a hard stare, full of resentment. "Now you're going to talk about money on Christmas Eve," he hissed through clenched teeth. "How tactless you are, Father. How classless." "I was just asking," I replied calmly. "It's been 2 years. The money is invested in the company. I can't just pull it out like that. I thought you understood." "I understand perfectly, son. I just wanted to know." But Mark didn't stop there. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and looked at me with a mixture of contempt and frustration I had never seen in his eyes before. "Do you know what your problem is, Father? You've always been a small man with a small mindset. You settled for being a carpenter your whole life, for living in this modest house, for not aspiring to anything greater. And now that I'm building something important, something significant, you come to bother me with your petty demands." Every word was a slap. Sophia stood up abruptly. "Mark, don't talk to your father like that," she said with a trembling voice. "It's the truth, Mother. Someone has to tell him." I remained seated, feeling Mark's words float in the air like toxic smoke. Sophia trembled with indignation beside me, but I placed my hand over hers, silently asking her to calm down. I didn't want the situation to escalate further. I still hoped Mark would come to his senses, that he would remember who he really was. "Son, I don't think this is the time or place for this conversation," I said, with as much serenity as possible. "We're family. It's Christmas. Let's put our differences aside and enjoy being together." Mark let out a dry, joyless laugh. "Enjoy? What exactly am I supposed to enjoy, Father? This old house that smells of mothballs, listening to your repeated stories about the old days, pretending I care what you think." Paige let out a stifled sob. Christine finally intervened, but not in the way I expected. "Mark, calm down a bit," she said, in a monotonous voice, without real conviction. "There's no need to be so direct." "Direct? Someone has to be," Mark continued, getting up from his chair. "I've been enduring these obligatory dinners, these meaningless traditions for years. I come because Paige insists, because you insist, but the truth is, I can't stand this charade anymore." I slowly stood up, looking him directly in the eyes. I wanted to understand when I had lost my son, at what exact moment he had become this stranger full of bitterness. "Shara?" I repeated. "Mark, this is your family. These are your roots. When did you become so cruel?" "I'm not cruel. I'm realistic. You lived your life your way, settling for little. I chose another path. You can't blame me for wanting more than you ever dared to dream of." "I never blamed you for wanting more," I replied, feeling sadness begin to transform into something different inside me. "I always supported you. I worked double shifts for years to pay for your college. I sold tools my father had left me to help you when you needed capital. I never denied you anything, and now you throw it back in my face, like all fathers do, as if I owe you my entire life for doing my basic job as a father." Sophia abruptly stood up, pointing a finger at Mark. "Enough! I will not allow you to speak to your father like that in this house." But Mark was out of control. Years of accumulated resentment, frustrations he had never expressed, it all poured out now like an unstoppable torrent. "You know what, Mother? You two never understood anything. You still live in the past, clinging to obsolete values. The world changed, but you stayed trapped here in this house, in this mediocre life." He walked around the table, gesturing with his hands, completely oblivious to the pain he was causing. Paige cried silently, wiping her tears with her napkin. I remained standing, motionless, observing everything with a strange clarity I had never experienced before. "Look at this place," Mark continued, gesturing around. 30-year-old furniture, faded curtains, yellowed photographs on the walls. You live as if time doesn't pass, as if progress doesn't exist. "These furniture pieces," I said in a calm voice, "I made myself with my own hands. Every chair, every table, every shelf. I paid for this house with 40 years of honest work. And these yellowed photographs are the history of our family. Yours, too. History that no longer interests me." He spat the words. "I built my own life far from all this." He walked over to where I had placed the silverware, those I inherited from my parents and that I had polished so carefully that same afternoon. He picked them up with disdain, examining them under the candlelight. "Even this ridiculous silverware should be in a museum, not on a modern table. Seriously, did you think we were going to feel special eating with antiques?" What happened next occurred so quickly that I barely had time to process it. Mark dropped the silverware onto the table with a dry clang, making it resonate against the plates. The noise startled everyone. Paige covered her face with her hands. Then Mark pointed directly at me, his accusatory finger inches from my face. "Do you know the truth, Father? You were always a useless old man who never knew how to do anything important with his life. You settled for being a simple carpenter, earning a pittance, living in this tiny house. And now, you pretend to give us life lessons when you never had the ambition or the courage to be someone important." The silence that followed was absolute. Not even anyone's breathing could be heard. Sophia was paralyzed, her hand over her mouth. Christine looked away, avoiding all eye contact. Paige openly sobbed, and I simply looked at him. I looked at him as if I were seeing him for the first time in my life. This 39-year-old man, dressed in an expensive suit, a Swiss watch on his wrist, polished Italian shoes. This stranger who was once my son, whom I carried in my arms when he was born, whom I taught to walk, whom I comforted when he had nightmares. "Get out of this table," Mark finally said, his voice cold as steel. "You can't even set the silverware correctly. Get out of here. You're not welcome at your own dinner." I looked at Sophia, perhaps seeking some kind of reaction, some sign that this was a nightmare from which I would soon wake, but her eyes only reflected horror and suppressed tears. I looked at Paige, who extended her hand towards me, trying to reach me. "Dad, no," she whispered. "Please don't do this." But Mark ignored her completely. He pointed imperiously to the dining room door, like someone throwing out a stray dog. "Leave now." I nodded slowly. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to give him the pleasure of seeing me break down in front of him. I gathered my dignity like one picks up a fallen coat and walked towards the door with firm, steady steps. As I left the dining room, I heard laughter, stifled, discreet but unmistakable laughter. Christine tried to suppress hers behind her hand, and Mark, my own son, smiled with satisfaction, as if he had just won some kind of battle. I went upstairs to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't break down. I simply began to think. I remained seated in that room for hours, listening to the muffled sounds coming from downstairs. I heard when Mark and his family finally left. Around midnight, I heard the slam of the front door. I heard the engine of his car driving away down the street. I heard Sophia's tired footsteps coming up the stairs. She entered without knocking, sat beside me, and rested her head on my shoulder. She said nothing for long minutes. There was no need. 43 years of marriage teach you to communicate without words. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered. "I should have defended you more. I should have stopped him before it went this far." "It's not your fault," I replied, taking her wrinkled hand in mine. "Mark made his decisions. He made it very clear what he thinks of us, of this life we built together." "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice broken. "I'm going to think," I said simply. "I'm going to think everything through, very carefully." Sophia went to sleep past 1 a.m. But I couldn't. I stayed awake all night, sitting by the window, watching the empty streets of Springfield under the Christmas lights twinkling in the distance. And as I watched, my mind began to work in a way I had never experienced before. I began to remember, not with nostalgia, but with analytical precision. I remembered every detail, every conversation, every strange moment that I had let pass at the time, but which now took on a completely different meaning. I remembered that afternoon in March 2023 when I visited Mark in Chicago without warning. I had gone to deliver some bank documents he needed to sign. I arrived at his office near 2 p.m. and found him having lunch with two partners at a lavish restaurant on Michigan Avenue. He greeted me coldly, almost with embarrassment. He didn't invite me to sit down. He just took the papers, signed them quickly, and told me he had important meetings. But before I left, I heard one of his partners ask him who I was. "Nobody important," Mark replied. "Just an acquaintance who needed a favor." An acquaintance, his own father reduced to an acquaintance, it was convenient to distance himself from in front of business people. At that moment, I felt a sharp pang in my chest, but I ignored it. I told myself he was busy, that he was under work pressure, that he hadn't really meant that. How blind I was. I also remembered Paige's birthday in September 2024. Sophia and I traveled to Chicago with gifts and a homemade cake. We arrived at 5 p.m., just as Mark had instructed us, but when we rang the doorbell, no one opened it for almost 10 minutes. Finally, Christine appeared at the door, disheveled and visibly uncomfortable. "Oh, it's you," she said, without immediately inviting us in. "Mark didn't tell me you were coming today." A lie. I myself had confirmed with him 2 days before. When we finally entered, I discovered there was another celebration underway. Paige's schoolmates, their parents, elegant people drinking French champagne from crystal glasses, and us, with our modest cake wrapped in aluminum foil, looking completely out of place. Mark introduced us briefly and then ignored us for the rest of the afternoon. We left before they cut the cake, feeling that our presence there was more of an annoyance than a joy. He was probably nervous about the party, Sophia told me on the train ride back. "You know how he is when there are a lot of people." But I knew the truth. Mark was ashamed of us, of our simple clothes, of our humble manners, of our way of speaking that betrayed our working-class origins. We were a reminder of where he came from, and he desperately wanted to forget that origin. I remembered the increasingly spaced-out phone calls. I remembered the excuses for not visiting us. I remembered the times he casually mentioned that we were getting old and that we should consider a retirement home because he wouldn't be able to take care of us when the time came. A retirement home. He wanted to remove us completely from his life, to put us somewhere he didn't have to see us, where we wouldn't be an inconvenience to his new image as a successful entrepreneur. Everything made perfect sense now. The comments about my profession, as if being a carpenter were a source of shame. The disdainful looks when I talked about my projects in the workshop. The way he diverted conversations when his friends asked about his family. Mark had constructed a fictional version of himself, a narrative where he was a self-made man who achieved success through his own merit, without anyone's help. And we, his parents, were a living contradiction to that story. We were proof that he had needed support, that someone held him up when he stumbled. December 25th dawned, and I was still awake, but my mind had never been so clear. I went down to my workshop, that sacred space where I had spent thousands of hours creating furniture, repairing broken objects, building things with my own hands. I opened the metal filing cabinet where I kept important documents. I took out the blue folder that contained all the papers related to Mark. Bank statements of the $50,000 transfer, text messages where he promised repayment, emails where he profusely thanked me for my support. Everything was there. Every broken promise, every documented lie, every occasion when I gave him additional money for emergencies he never specified. I mentally calculated that between the initial loan and subsequent aid, I had given him almost $70,000 in less than 2 years. $70,000 that represented my entire life savings, the fund I planned to use for my retirement, the money Sophia and I had saved for medical emergencies, for house repairs, for helping Paige with her college studies when the time came, all handed over to a son who now called me a useless old man. But I didn't feel anger. I felt something much more powerful, absolute determination. Mark had made a fundamental mistake. He believed my kindness was weakness. He mistook my patience for stupidity. He thought he could humiliate me without consequences because I had always yielded, always forgiven, always put his needs above my own. That version of me had died last night in the dining room. The person who was now organizing documents with steady hands was someone different, someone who finally understood that love has limits, that respect is not optional, that dignity is not negotiable. Sophia came downstairs around 8 a.m. and found me surrounded by papers. "What are you doing?" she asked, worried. "Preparing myself," I replied without looking up. "Mark taught me something valuable last night. He taught me that I had been a fool." "Arthur, no. Let me finish. For years, I believed that being a good father meant giving everything without asking for anything in return. But I was wrong. Being a good father also means teaching consequences, setting limits, demanding respect." I closed the blue folder and put it away carefully. "I'm going to fix this, Sophia. I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago." The days following December 25th, I dedicated myself to a task I never thought I would undertake, meticulously investigating the financial life my own son had built with my money. It wasn't difficult. Mark never imagined that I would pay attention to details, that I was capable of connecting dots, of understanding how things really worked. On December 28th, while Sophia visited her sister in Peoria, Illinois, I sat in front of the computer Paige had given me 2 years earlier. That machine I barely used for reading news and sending emails became my tool of discovery. I searched for Mark's company online, Quinn Business Consulting LLC. It had an elegant website, professional photographs, testimonials from satisfied clients, all very impressive at first glance. But when I reviewed the Public Business Registry records, I discovered fascinating information. The company had been incorporated on January 15, 2023, with a share capital of exactly $50,000. My money. But what was interesting was who was listed as a partner. Mark Quinn with a 51% stake and Jared Michaels with 49%. Jared Michaels. That name sounded familiar. I rummaged through my memory until I remembered. He was the college friend Mark vaguely mentioned when he asked for the loan. According to Mark, Jared would contribute contacts and experience, while Mark would provide the initial capital. Contacts and experience valued at $0, apparently, while my lifelong sacrifice translated into cold numbers in a business registry. I kept investigating. I found the company's annual accounts filed with the Illinois Secretary of State's Business Registry in Chicago. The documents were public, accessible to anyone with enough patience to look for them. And I had all the patience in the world. The figures revealed a very different story from what Mark had told me. Yes, the company had invoiced $200,000 in 2024, just as he boasted during dinner. But the operating expenses were exorbitant. Office rent in a premium area, $3,500 monthly. Company vehicle, a BMW 5 Series valued at $60,000. Frequent business trips, dinners with clients at expensive restaurants. The actual net profit was barely $18,000, and according to the articles of incorporation, which were also available, that profit was distributed proportionally among the partners. Mark had earned approximately $9,000 net throughout the year, less than what I earned as a retired carpenter with my pension and the occasional jobs I still took, yet he lived as if he were a millionaire. The suit he wore on Christmas Eve was worth well over $1,000. I recognized it by the label when he hung up his jacket. The watch on his wrist was an Omega Seamaster, easily valued at $4,000 or more. The Italian shoes, another $500. Where was that money coming from? The answer was obvious: bank loans. I reviewed more documents and found that the company had open credit lines totaling $80,000. Mark was living on debt, maintaining a facade of success while sinking financially, and I had financed that charade. I had made it possible for my son to build a house of cards that would inevitably collapse. On December 30th, I visited my bank. I asked to speak with Randall Perry, the branch manager who had known me for 20 years. I brought all the documents I had gathered: transfer confirmations, text messages, emails, bank statements. "Randall, I need legal advice," I told him directly. "I lent money to my son 2 years ago, and I want to know my options for getting it back." Randall examined the papers with a serious expression, took notes, made calculations, checked dates. "Mr. Quinn," he finally said, "you have solid documentation here of an informal loan. The messages where he promises to repay the money are clear evidence that it was not a donation. Legally, you can demand repayment." "And if he can't pay," I asked, "then you would have to initiate a legal process. Given that the money was used as capital for his company, you could claim against the company's assets. But I warn you, these processes are long and costly." "I'm not interested in the money," I replied calmly. "I'm interested in him understanding that there are consequences." Randall looked at me with understanding. No more explanation was needed. "Allow me to recommend someone," he said, writing a name on a card. "Raymond Vance is a lawyer specializing in family and business law, an upright and discreet man. Tell him you came on my recommendation." I carefully put the card in my wallet. It was the first concrete step, the first tangible action of a plan that was forming with increasing clarity in my mind. That same afternoon, while organizing tools in the workshop, I found something I had completely forgotten about: a wooden box I built for Mark when he turned 10. I had made it with my own hands, carving his name into the lid with careful letters. Inside, it held old photographs, childhood drawings, small treasures from his youth. I opened the box and reviewed its contents. There was a photograph of Mark at 7 years old, sitting on my lap in this very workshop. He smiled with genuine joy, holding a small hammer I had specially made for him. On the back of the photo, in my handwriting, was written, "My son, my pride, my future." January 1992. I looked at that image for a long time. That happy child had transformed into the man who humiliated me in front of the whole family. At what moment did it happen? When exactly did I lose my son? I kept looking. I found a letter Mark wrote to me when he was 14, after we had a serious argument because he had failed math. The letter said, "Dad, I'm sorry I disappointed you. I promised to try harder. You're the best dad in the world, and I want to make you proud someday. I love you very much." The words were written in clumsy teenage handwriting, but the sincerity was undeniable. That boy really loved me. That boy valued my opinion, sought my approval, desired my pride. Where was that boy? What transformed him into someone capable of calling me a useless old man? I closed the box and put it away again. I wasn't going to let nostalgia soften me. The Mark in the photograph no longer existed. The adult who came to my house on Christmas Eve was someone completely different, someone who had consciously chosen contempt over respect, arrogance over gratitude. On December 31st, while everyone in the US was preparing to ring in the new year, I dialed the phone number Randall had given me. A professional, warm voice answered. "Vance Law Office, good morning." "Good morning. My name is Arthur Quinn. Randall Perry from First National Bank recommended I contact Mr. Vance." "One moment, please." I waited barely 30 seconds before another voice picked up the line. "Arthur, this is Raymond Vance. Randall mentioned you might call. How can I help you? I took a deep breath before answering. I need help to reclaim my dignity, I said firmly, and I am willing to do whatever it takes to achieve it. On January 2, 2025, I met Raymond Vance in his office in downtown Springfield. He was a man in his 50s with perfectly combed gray hair, a sober suit, and an intelligent gaze. His office conveyed seriousness without pretension. Shelves full of legal codes, a University of Illinois diploma on the wall, an orderly desk. "Tell me everything from the beginning," he said, after offering me coffee, without omitting any details, no matter how uncomfortable. And that's what I did. I told him about the initial $50,000 loan in December 2022. I explained the additional aid I had given. $5,000 in April 2023, when Mark said he had temporary liquidity problems. $3,500 in August of the same year for an urgent opportunity. Another $6,000 in February 2024 because of supposed delays in client payments. Raymond took meticulous notes, occasionally asking specific questions about dates, amounts, and transfer methods. He showed no judgment or pity, only concentrated professionalism. Then, I told him about Christmas Eve. Every humiliating word, every contemptuous gesture, every cruel laugh. My voice didn't tremble as I recounted it. There was no room left for tears, only for absolute clarity. "I understand," Raymond said when I finished. "The first thing you should know is that legally you are in the right. The messages where Mark promises repayment make this a loan, not a gift. You can demand its return." "How long would a judicial process take?" I asked. "Between 1 and 2 years, optimistically, and the costs would be considerable. Furthermore, if Mark's company is in debt, as you suspect, recovering the money would be complicated, even if you win the lawsuit." "I don't need to recover the money," I said firmly. "I need him to understand that his actions have consequences." Raymond leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "Arthur, I'm going to be frank with you. I've handled many cases of family conflict. Most parents in your situation seek reconciliation, not justice. Are you completely sure of what you want to do?" "Completely," I replied, without hesitation. "I spent 40 years being a father who gave without asking for anything in return, and my son interpreted that generosity as weakness. If I don't set limits now, he will continue to trample over me until the day I die." "Very well. Then I propose a different strategy. Instead of going straight to court, we can send a formal demand letter. It's a formal document where you demand the repayment of the money within a specific period, usually 30 days. If he doesn't comply, that demand serves as solid evidence for any subsequent legal action." "And will that scare him?" I asked. "It will confront him with reality," Raymond corrected. "Mark has lived believing there are no consequences. An official legal document delivered by a notary public will show him that you are taking this seriously." I nodded slowly, processing the information. "There's something else," Raymond continued. "You mentioned that you have bank accounts where Mark is listed as an authorized signatory. Those authorizations can be revoked immediately. You also said that you gave him power of attorney 3 years ago to manage certain procedures when you were ill. Those powers can also be revoked." "I can do that without his consent?" "Of course, they are your accounts, your powers. You can revoke them whenever you wish. In fact, I recommend you do it as soon as possible. As long as Mark has access to your resources, he maintains a certain control over you." The clarity of those words was like a ray of light cutting through thick fog. Raymond was right. I had given so much power to Mark. I had given him so many keys to my life that he believed he had a right to everything. "Do it," I said with determination. "Prepare the demand letter and help me revoke all authorizations." Raymond smiled slightly, the first hint of emotion he showed. "We'll start tomorrow. I'll need copies of all the documents you showed me. I'll also prepare the power of attorney revocation forms. Is there anyone you trust who can accompany you in this process? This will be emotionally difficult." I immediately thought of Bethany, my younger sister. She lived in a neighboring town with her husband, but we had always maintained a close relationship. Bethany knew Mark well. She had witnessed some of his previous outbursts, though never as serious as on Christmas Eve. "My sister," I replied. "I can trust her completely." "Perfect. I suggest you bring her up to speed on everything. And Arthur, one last thing. Prepare for Mark's reaction. When he receives that demand, he will probably respond with anger. He will try to manipulate you, perhaps threaten you. He will definitely accuse you of being cruel or vengeful. He already called me a useless old man in front of the whole family," I said, calmly. "There's no word that can hurt me more than those." I left Raymond's office with a folder full of documents to complete, and for the first time in days, with a sense of clear purpose. I was not acting out of revenge or resentment. I was acting out of dignity, self-respect, and basic justice. That same afternoon, I called Bethany. I told her everything without filters: the loan, the humiliations, the Christmas dinner, my plan with Raymond. She listened in silence, only interrupting occasionally to ask for clarification. "Arthur," she finally said, her voice laden with contained emotion, "you should have told me this sooner. You didn't have to carry all this alone. I didn't want to worry you. I thought I could handle it. Mark was always difficult, even as a child. But this is unforgivable. What do you need from me? I need you to be there when things get tough. I need to know someone supports me, that I'm not losing my mind." "I'll be there," she promised without hesitation. "I'll come to Springfield this weekend. We can review everything together, plan the next steps. And Arthur, listen to me well. You are doing the right thing. A son who treats his father like that does not deserve his generosity." I hung up the phone, feeling immense relief. I wasn't alone. I had Sophia, though she was still processing everything with difficulty. I had Bethany, whose unconditional support strengthened me, and I had Raymond, a professional who understood exactly what I needed to do. On January 5th, in early January, I was at the bank, completing revocation forms. The process was surprisingly simple. I signed 3 documents, presented my identification, and in less than 30 minutes, Mark no longer had access to any of my accounts. "Are you sure, Mr. Quinn?" Randall asked, obligated to confirm by protocol. "This action is irreversible without initiating a new process." "Completely sure," I replied without hesitation. On January 7th, I went with Raymond to the notary public to revoke the powers of attorney I had granted Mark in June 2022. I had given him those powers when I had that heart problem and needed someone to manage urgent matters if I couldn't. Mark promised to use them only in emergencies, only to protect me. Now, those powers represented another form of control he had over my life, another instrument of dependence that I myself had created. The notary read the revocation document in a formal, clear voice. I signed in 3 different places. Raymond acted as a witness, and officially, Mark no longer had any legal power over my affairs. "The demand letter will be ready the day after tomorrow," Raymond informed me. We will send it by certified mail with a return receipt. Mark will probably receive it on January 12th or 13th. I nodded, feeling my heart pound with anticipated force. Soon, Mark would know that something had changed. Soon, he would understand that his father was not the useless old man he imagined. On January 13th, 2025, exactly at 11:40 in the morning, my cell phone rang. It was a Chicago number that I recognized immediately. Mark. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, he called again. I didn't answer that time either. Bethany was with me in the kitchen, drinking coffee as we reviewed documents. She looked at me with concern when the phone rang for the third consecutive time. "It's him, isn't it?" she asked. "He just received the demand letter," I replied calmly, letting the phone continue to ring on the table. "Raymond informed me this morning that the return receipt arrived yesterday. Mark signed it personally at 10:30. The phone finally fell silent. Seconds later, text messages started arriving. I read them with Bethany looking over my shoulder. "Dad, what is this? A demand letter? You've gone crazy. Call me immediately. We need to talk about this madness. You can't do this to me. I'm your son." Bethany snorted in disbelief. "Now he remembers he's your son. How convenient." I put the phone in my pocket without replying to any message. Raymond had prepared me for this. He explained that the first reaction would always be to try to re-establish direct contact, to prevent the situation from escalating legally. Mark would seek to confront me emotionally, make me feel guilty, manipulate the situation in his favor. But I was no longer the same man from Christmas Eve. That Arthur, who allowed himself to be trampled, had died amidst the cruel laughter I heard as I left the dining room. At 2 p.m., while Sophia was preparing lunch, a different call came. It was Christine, Mark's wife. This time I answered, genuinely curious about what role she would play in all this. "Arthur," she began with a trembling voice. "Please, I need you to talk to Mark. He's furious. He's saying terrible things. He says you betrayed him, that after everything he did for you, this is how you repay him." "Everything he did for me?" I repeated with icy calm. "Christine, tell me exactly what you think Mark did for me." Uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. "Well, he's always been there for you," she stammered unconvincingly. "He's always supported you." "Supported me?" "I lent him $70,000 that he never repaid. I gave him access to my bank accounts that he used without my knowledge. I granted him legal powers that he never consulted me about before exercising. And in gratitude, he called me a useless old man and kicked me out of my own table at Christmas while you laughed. Is that support, Christine?" "I didn't laugh," she protested weakly. "I saw you. You were there. You covered your mouth with your hand, but your eyes were smiling. You enjoyed my humiliation as much as he did." Another silence. This one longer. "Arthur, please. Mark has a lot of debt. If you demand that amount now, his company will collapse. We'll lose everything. You should have thought of that before treating me like disposable garbage. But he's your son, your own blood. How can you be so cruel?" "Cruel?" I repeated the word, savoring it. "Do you know what's cruel, Christine? Raising a son with unconditional love for 39 years, sacrificing your own dreams to finance his, working until your body is broken to give him opportunities you never had, and for that son to look at you with disgust and treat you as if you were an embarrassing nuisance. That's cruel. Please, at least talk to him. Give him a chance to explain himself." He already had that chance. He had it for 2 years while he spent my money. He had it on Christmas Eve before he humiliated me. There are no more opportunities. I hung up before she could respond. Bethany watched me with silent approval. "Well done," she simply said. That night, around 11 p.m., Paige sent me a message. It was the first time I had heard from my granddaughter since Christmas. "Grandpa, Dad told me about the paper he received. He's very upset. He says ugly things about you, but I know there must be a reason. Can I call you tomorrow? I miss you very much." That message broke my heart in a way that none of Mark's words had managed to do. Paige was innocent in all this. She didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this conflict. I replied immediately, "Princess, of course you can call me. I love you very much. None of this changes what I feel for you. We'll talk calmly tomorrow." On January 14th at 10 a.m., Paige called. Her voice sounded broken, as if she had been crying. "Grandpa, why is this happening? Dad says you're suing him, that you want to take his company, that you turned mean." "Paige, listen to me carefully. I didn't turn mean. I just stopped allowing myself to be treated badly. There are things that happened between your father and me that are complicated to explain, but I need you to understand something. I will always love you. None of this is your fault." "But the family is breaking apart," she sobbed. "Mom cries all the time. Dad yells on the phone with lawyers. Grandma Sophia called me yesterday, and she was crying too. Everything is wrong." "I know, honey, and it hurts me that you're in the middle of this, but sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions to protect their dignity." "Dignity, what does that really mean?" I took a moment before answering, choosing my words carefully. "It means that no one, not even family, has the right to treat you as if you are worthless. It means setting boundaries when someone abuses your kindness. It means teaching with actions that respect is not optional." Paige was silent for several seconds. When she spoke again, her voice sounded more mature, more thoughtful. "Grandpa, I was there at Christmas. I saw what Dad said to you. I saw how he treated you. Mum forbade me to talk about it, but I know it was wrong. Very wrong. Thank you for acknowledging that, Princess. What's going to happen now? Will we never be together again?" "I don't know, Paige. That depends on your father. He can choose to recognize his mistake and change, or he can continue to blame me. But regardless of what he chooses, I will no longer be his victim." After hanging up with Paige, I sat in the workshop for hours, surrounded by tools I had used for decades. Every saw, every hammer, every chisel had a history. Some I inherited from my father. Others I bought with my first salary. All represented years of honest work, of building, of creating useful and beautiful things with my own hands. Mark despised this workshop. He called it a dusty old shack. He never understood that this was where I had forged my identity, where I had learned the value of effort, where I had built the life that allowed him to have opportunities I never had. I picked up a piece of oak wood I was saving for a special project. It was a beautiful piece, with perfect grain, polished until it gleamed. I held it in my hands, feeling its weight, its texture, its potential, and then I understood something fundamental. I was like this wood. Mark had tried to carve me to his convenience, to give me the shape he needed, to reduce me to something simple and manageable. But oak wood does not bend easily. It has inner strength, density, resilience, just like me. On January 15th, I received a call from Raymond. "Arthur, Mark hired a lawyer. His name is Edward Black. He has a reputation for being aggressive. He just sent me an email threatening to counterclaim for emotional damages if you don't withdraw the demand immediately. Emotional damages? I repeated with disbelief. It's an intimidation tactic. It has no solid legal basis, but it works to scare people who aren't prepared. Do you feel intimidated? Not at all. Perfect. Then we respond firmly. The 30-day period runs from the 13th. If there's no payment or serious repayment proposal by February 12th, we proceed with the formal lawsuit. Do it, I confirmed without hesitation. 10 days of absolute silence passed. 10 days where there were no calls from Mark, no pleading messages from Christine, no attempts at emotional manipulation. That silence was more revealing than 1,000 words. Mark was meeting with his lawyer, strategizing, looking for ways to avoid the consequences of his actions. On January 25th, I decided to take the initiative. I called Raymond. I want to convene a formal family meeting, I told him. At my house, with Mark, Christine, and you as a legal witness. I want to make everything absolutely clear. Are you sure? These meetings can become very emotional. That's why I need you there to keep everything professional and documented. Agreed. I'll prepare a formal summons. What date do you propose? February 2nd, Saturday at 4 p.m. Raymond drafted the summons that same afternoon. It was a sober but forceful document, explaining that Mark's attendance was mandatory to discuss the resolution of the demand letter and that his absence would be interpreted as a refusal to negotiate in good faith, proceeding then directly with legal action. The summons was sent by certified mail on January 26th. Mark received it on the 28th, according to the return receipt Raymond carefully monitored. This time, Mark responded immediately, but he didn't call. He sent a formal email through his lawyer, Edward Black, confirming attendance but demanding that his legal representative also be present. I accepted without issue. The more witnesses, the better. The days leading up to the meeting, I spent mentally preparing myself. Bethany stayed with me that entire week, helping me organize documents, rehearsing possible scenarios, constantly reminding me that I was right in what I was doing. Sophia, for her part, was divided. One part of her supported my position. The other remained a mother, unable to completely let go of the hope of reconciliation. The night of February 1st found me awake in the workshop. "Are you sure about this?" Sophia asked, sitting next to me on the workbench. "Tomorrow could change everything forever." "Everything already changed on Christmas Eve," I replied. "Tomorrow, we just make official what Mark already destroyed. He's our only son, Arthur. I know, and that's precisely why I need to do this. A son who doesn't learn consequences will never mature. He's already 39. If he doesn't understand now, he never will." Sophia nodded slowly, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. I hugged her, feeling her pain, which was also mine, though I processed it differently. On February 2nd, I woke up at 6 a.m., unable to sleep any longer. I made coffee, reviewed for the 100th time the documents I would present, and checked that everything in the house was in order. Bethany arrived at 2 p.m., bringing cookies she had baked and moral support I needed more than ever. Raymond appeared at 3:30, impeccably dressed in a grey suit, leather briefcase in hand. We reviewed the strategy one last time. "Remember," he instructed me, "stay calm no matter what Mark says. Let me handle the legal aspects. You just express how you feel, set your boundaries, and stand firm in your position." At exactly 4 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there was Mark. He didn't come alone with Christine. He also brought Edward Black, a burly man about 45 years old with a severe expression, and surprisingly, Paige. My granddaughter looked at me with pleading eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. I hadn't counted on her presence. Mark had brought her as an emotional shield, knowing that seeing her would make it harder for me to maintain my firm stance. Paige shouldn't be here, I said immediately. This is a conversation between adults. Paige has a right to know how her grandfather is destroying her family, Mark replied coldly. Mark, Raymond intervened with professional authority. This meeting was convened for legal and financial matters. The presence of a minor is inappropriate. Edward Black took a step forward. My client has the right to bring whomever he deems necessary. The girl stays, or we all leave. I looked at Paige, who seemed to want to disappear. I made a quick decision. It's all right, let her stay, but let her hear the whole truth, not just the manipulated version her father has told her. I invited them into the living room. I had arranged the chairs in a semicircle facing the sofa, where Raymond, Bethany, and I would sit. It was a deliberately formal arrangement, like a boardroom, not a casual family gathering. Mark sat with a rigid posture, arms crossed, a defiant expression. Christine avoided my gaze. Edward Black took a digital recorder from his briefcase. I will record this conversation for legal purposes, he announced. Perfect, Raymond responded, pulling out his own recorder. We will too. Paige sat on a separate chair, small and frightened, clearly not wanting to be there. It broke my heart to see her like that, but I couldn't back down now. Let's begin, I said in a firm voice. Mark, I asked you to come because I need to tell you some things I should have said a long time ago. Spare me the dramatic speech, Father, he interrupted with disdain. I'm here because my lawyer forced me. Tell me what you want, and let's end this charade. I took a deep breath, controlling the anger that threatened to surface. I want you to understand exactly what you did. On December 24th, at this very table, you humiliated me in front of the entire family, called me a useless old man, kicked me out of my own dinner, and no one, absolutely no one, defended me. That was an emotional misunderstanding, Edward Black said mechanically. My client was under considerable stress. It was no misunderstanding, I continued, ignoring the lawyer. It was the culmination of 2 years of constant contempt. 2 years where you took my money, used my generosity, and repaid me with humiliation. Mark let out a bitter laugh. Your money? That money was an investment in my future, in your granddaughter. You should be proud that your son is a successful entrepreneur. Successful? I repeated, with icy calm. Mark, I have your company's annual accounts right here. They are public documents. Your company earned a net profit of $9,000 last year. $9,000. Less than my retirement pension. Mark's face paled slightly. He hadn't expected me to have investigated so deeply. Furthermore, I continued, you have $80,000 in bank loans. You live on debt, maintaining a facade of success that doesn't exist, and on top of that, you have the audacity to call me mediocre when I built an honest life owing nothing to anyone. Those are confidential data, Edward Black stammered. How did you obtain them? They are public data from the business registry, Raymond replied, with barely contained satisfaction. Any citizen can consult them. Mark abruptly stood up, pointing at me furiously. You investigated my company, my finances? What kind of father does that? The kind of father who finally opened his eyes, I replied, without flinching. The kind of father who got tired of being treated like garbage. Dad, please, Paige cried, with tears in her eyes. Stop it, both of you, please. My granddaughter's crying momentarily halted the confrontation. Mark turned to her, his expression softening artificially. See, Paige? See what your grandfather is doing? He's destroying this family out of pride, isn't he? You destroyed it, I said firmly, when you decided that respect was optional. I slowly got up from the sofa and walked over to the sideboard where I kept family documents. I pulled out a thick folder I had prepared specifically for this moment. I placed it on the coffee table, opening it so everyone could see its contents. Here is everything, I said, in a calm but firm voice. Transfer confirmation from December 15th, 2022 for $50,000. Confirmation from April 20th, 2023 for $5,000. Confirmation from August 8th, 2023 for $3,500. Confirmation from February 13, 2024 for $6,000. I placed each document on the table one by one, creating a visual timeline that was impossible to ignore. Total $64,500, but there's more. I took out another section of the folder. Here are the text messages where you promised repayment with interest. Here are the emails where you assured me that everything was temporary, that your company would take off soon. Here are the conversations where you asked for patience, where you told me I was the best dad in the world. Mark looked at the documents with an increasingly tense expression. Edward Black picked up some papers, examining them with growing professional concern. And now, I continued, taking out the last section. Here's the most interesting part. Extracts of personal expenses you posted on your social media. Trip to Mallorca in July. Photos at a 5-star hotel. Dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant. In September, you posted the bill, $280 for 2 people. New watch in October. You tagged the brand, $4,000. Paige looked alternately at the documents and her father, processing information she clearly knew nothing about. While you spent my money on unnecessary luxuries, I said, raising my voice slightly for the first time, I continued working in my workshop, repairing furniture to supplement my pension. While you flaunted your fake lifestyle online, your mother and I ate the same meal 3 days in a row to save money. While you traveled to Mallorca, we cancelled a trip we had planned for years because there was no money left. Sophia, who had remained silent next to Bethany, began to cry softly. Bethany took her hand, offering silent comfort. Mr. Quinn, Edward Black intervened in a more conciliatory tone. I understand your frustration, but we must discuss reasonable terms of repayment. My client cannot pay that amount immediately. I don't want his money, I said, looking directly at Mark. It's no longer about money. It's about him understanding that there are consequences. It's about him learning that he cannot treat people like disposable trash. Then what do you want? Mark exploded. What do you expect me to do? Get on my knees and beg for forgiveness? Cry and plead with you? I want you to acknowledge what you did. I want you to look your daughter in the eyes and explain to her why you humiliated her grandfather on Christmas. I want you to admit you were wrong. The silence that followed was dense, heavy. Mark held my gaze for long seconds. I saw something shift in his eyes, some kind of internal battle. For a moment, just for a fleeting instant, I thought that perhaps we would reach some understanding. But then his expression hardened again. I'm not going to do that, he said with a cold voice. Because I wasn't wrong. I spoke truths you needed to hear. Your whole life has been conformist, mediocre, without ambition. And now that I've achieved more than you ever dreamed of, you punish me for your own insecurity. Those words fell like stones into still water. Paige let out a stifled sob. Christine closed her eyes, with an expression of pain. Even Edward Black seemed uncomfortable with his client's declaration. Raymond leaned forward, taking control of the conversation with professional authority. Very well. Given that Mr. Mark Quinn refuses to acknowledge responsibility or show remorse, we proceed with the legal terms. The demand letter sets 30 days for full repayment or a formal payment proposal. That deadline expires on February 12th. Does your client have any proposal? Edward Black exchanged glances with Mark before responding. We can offer monthly payments of $500 for 10 years, 120 months. Raymond calculated quickly. $60,000 in total. That doesn't cover the legal interest due, nor the emotional costs. Unacceptable. It's the most my client can offer, given his current financial situation. His financial situation, Raymond replied, with barely veiled irony, includes documented luxury expenses that he could clearly reduce to prioritize his legitimate debts. Mark abruptly stood up. I'm not going to change my lifestyle because my father had an outburst of senility. If you want to take this to court, go ahead, but I warn you that I will counterclaim for emotional damages, for defamation, for harassment. I also stood up, facing him directly. There was no fear in me anymore, only absolute clarity. Do it, I said, with disturbing calm. Take me to court. Sue me for everything you want. But understand this, Mark. You already lost. You lost the day you decided that money was worth more than dignity. You lost when you humiliated the man who sacrificed everything for you. You lost when you chose arrogance over gratitude. I lost nothing, he spat the words. I'm the one with the business, the big house, the successful life. You're still the old carpenter who was never anyone. I smiled then. A sad but genuine smile. You're right about something. I am an old carpenter, but that old carpenter taught you to walk. He held you when you had nightmares. He worked double shifts to pay for your college. He sold tools inherited from his father to give you initial capital. And yes, maybe I was never anyone important to the world, but I should have been important to you. For the first time, I saw something break in Mark's expression. For just a second, his mask of arrogance cracked, showing something akin to pain or confusion, but he quickly repressed it. This is a waste of time, he said, turning to Edward Black. Let's go, I've heard enough emotional manipulation. Before they left, Raymond intervened, taking a sealed envelope from his briefcase. I must officially hand you this notification. As of today, Arthur Quinn formally revokes any kind of financial, emotional, or family support towards Mark Quinn. There will be no more loans, no more aid, no more bailouts when your fabricated life collapses under your debts. Edward Black took the envelope, reading its contents quickly. This also includes, Raymond continued, the revocation of testamentary inheritance. Arthur has amended his will. Mark is no longer listed as an heir to any property, bank account, or personal possession. Mark's face paled noticeably. He clearly had not expected that. You disinherited me? He asked in a choked voice. Yes, I replied without hesitation. Everything I built during my life will go to Paige when she turns 25, administered by a trust until then. You will receive absolutely nothing. You can't do that. I'm your only son. There are laws. American laws, Raymond intervened with professional satisfaction, allow disinheritance of children for severe physical or psychological abuse towards parents. The documented public humiliation my client suffered at Christmas, combined with the demonstrable pattern of emotional abuse, constitutes sufficient legal cause. Mark turned to Paige, who was openly crying. Paige, tell your grandfather something. Tell him he's making a mistake. My granddaughter looked at me with eyes full of tears and confusion. Then she looked at her father, and then, to everyone's surprise, spoke with a trembling but clear voice. Dad, I was there at Christmas. I saw you. I heard what you said, and it was wrong, very wrong. Paige's words fell like a lightning bolt in the middle of the room. Mark froze, looking at his daughter with a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. Christine covered her mouth with both hands, stifling a sob. Paige, you don't know what you're talking about, Mark said with a strangled voice. You're too young to understand the complexities of— I'm 14, Dad, she interrupted him with surprising firmness. I'm not dumb. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. You called Grandpa a useless old man. You kicked him out of the table, and we all stayed quiet like cowards. She stood up, walking towards where I was. She took my hands in hers, small but firm. Grandpa, forgive me for not defending you that night. I was scared. Scared that Dad would get angry with me too. But it was wrong. I should have said something. I hugged her tightly, feeling my heart break and heal simultaneously. This 14-year-old girl had more courage and honesty than all the adults present on Christmas Eve. It's not your fault, Princess, I whispered in her ear. It was never your fault. Mark observed the scene with a distraught expression. For the first time since all this began, he seemed genuinely affected, but when he spoke, his voice still carried defensiveness. Paige, you can't side with your grandfather against your own father. We're family. Exactly, my granddaughter replied, turning to him. We are family, and families respect each other. Families don't humiliate each other publicly. Families don't treat each other like trash. Edward Black, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional turn of the meeting, tried to regain professional control. Gentlemen, I think we should focus on the legal aspects. Emotions are running high. I propose a 15-day recess for all parties to reconsider their positions. No, I said firmly. There will be no recess. Mark has until February 12 to pay or present an acceptable proposal. If he doesn't, we will proceed with a full legal lawsuit. There's nothing more to discuss. Mark finally exploded. The mask of control he had maintained completely disintegrated. This is ridiculous. You act as if you're the perfect victim, but you conveniently forget all the times I had to endure your boring sermons, your repetitive stories, your suffocating expectations. You suffocated me my whole life with your antiquated morality. Suffocate you? I repeated with icy calm. Paying for your entire college education was suffocating? Giving you my house as collateral when no bank trusted you was suffocating? Taking care of Paige for months when you traveled was an oppressive expectation? That was your obligation as a father. That's what fathers do. No, Bethany intervened, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. Her voice was hard as stone. Fathers give love, support, and opportunities, but children must return respect, gratitude, and basic dignity. You failed in your part of the deal, Mark. You have no right to comment, Mark retorted. This isn't your problem. It became my problem when I saw my brother shattered after Christmas, when I heard how he cried that night, something he hadn't done since our father died. You made it my problem when you decided to destroy a 67-year-old man who only wanted to have dinner with his family. Christine, who had remained practically invisible throughout the meeting, finally found her voice. Arthur, please. Mark made mistakes. I admit it, but we are family. There has to be a way to fix this without destroying everything. Now you admit they were mistakes? I asked her directly. On Christmas, it didn't seem like you thought so. You seemed to enjoy the show. I was scared, she admitted with a broken voice. Scared to contradict Mark when he was like that. Scared that his fury would turn against me. I know it's cowardly, but it's the truth. At least she's honest, Bethany murmured, with barely contained disdain. Raymond checked his watch and then looked at me, awaiting direction on how to proceed. I motioned for him to continue. Mr. Mark Quinn, Raymond said, with absolute legal formality, you have exactly 10 days to make a decision. Option 1. Full payment of $64,500 plus legal interest for an approximate total of $72,000. Option 2. A realistic payment proposal documented with verifiable bank guarantees. Option 3. Face a full legal lawsuit with all corresponding legal consequences. I don't have $72,000, Mark said in a defeated voice. My company is barely surviving. The banks won't lend me any more money. I have no way to pay that amount. Then Raymond replied without compassion, you should have thought about that before spending your father's money on trips and luxuries while treating him with contempt. Sell the BMW, I said suddenly. That car you flaunt is worth $60,000. Sell it. Use that money to start paying your debt. Mark looked at me with genuine horror. It's the company car. I need it for meetings with clients. Without it, my professional image, your professional image, I interrupted with a bitter laugh, is built on lies and debts. It's an empty facade, and you prefer to maintain that facade rather than do the right thing by your father. You don't understand how the modern business world works, he argued desperately. Appearance matters. If I arrive at meetings by public transport, I lose credibility. And there it is, I said, turning to Raymond and Bethany. There's the naked truth. Mark values the opinion of strangers more than his own father's dignity. He prefers to impress clients who will never give him unconditional love, rather than honor the man who always loved him unconditionally. Paige moved away from me and walked toward her father. She looked at him steadily with a maturity that far surpassed her 14 years. Dad, sell the car. Give Grandpa his money back. Apologize, please. Do it before it's too late. Mark looked at her, and for the first time I saw tears forming in his eyes. Tears of frustration, of rage, of something that might have been regret, but which he refused to acknowledge. I can't, he whispered. I can't admit I was wrong. I can't undo everything I built. You built nothing, I said, with deep sadness. You built a house of cards with borrowed money and an inflated ego. And now that the wind blows, you discover there are no solid foundations. Edward Black closed his briefcase with a definitive gesture. Mr. Quinn, I need to speak with you privately now. They went out to the garden, leaving us in a heavy silence. Through the window, we saw them arguing heatedly. Edward gestured emphatically, clearly trying to convince Mark of something. Mark shook his head repeatedly, closing himself off more and more. When they returned 5 minutes later, Edward had a resigned expression. My client needs time to consult with his accountant and explore financing options. He formally requests an extension of 15 additional days to the original deadline. Denied, I replied, before Raymond could speak. The deadline is set. 10 days, not 1 day more. Mr. Quinn, be reasonable. I was reasonable for 2 years. I was patient for 24 months. I was understanding every time Mark promised and didn't deliver. Patience is over. Understanding is over. 10 days. Mark then looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't rage or arrogance. It was something darker, deeper. It was pure, raw resentment. This won't end well for anyone, he said in a low, threatening voice. If you sink me, I'll make sure we all sink together. Are you threatening me? I asked calmly. I'm telling you the reality. Paige will suffer. Christine will suffer. Even you will suffer when you see the consequences of your stubbornness. The only consequences, I replied with absolute firmness, will be those you yourself created with your decisions. I am only setting boundaries that I should have set years ago. Raymond stood up, ending the meeting. Gentlemen, I believe there's nothing more to discuss today. The clock is ticking. February 12th is the deadline. Good day. Mark, Christine, and Edward Black left without another word. Paige stayed behind for a moment, hugging me once more. I love you, Grandpa. No matter what, I love you. And I you, Princess, always. When she left, I collapsed onto the sofa, emotionally and physically exhausted. Bethany sat beside me, Sophia on the other side. The three of us remained in silence for long minutes. Did I do the right thing? I finally asked. Yes, they both replied in unison, but in my heart, the doubt persisted. The next 10 days were the longest of my life. Every morning I woke up hoping for some sign from Mark, some indication that he had finally understood the gravity of the situation. But the silence was absolute. No calls, no messages, no attempts at contact. On February 8th, 4 days before the deadline, Paige called me. Her voice sounded tired, as if she had aged years in a few weeks. Grandpa, Dad sold the BMW yesterday. He sold it for $48,000 to a used car dealership. He's devastated. He cries at night. Mom cries too. The house is a hell. My heart contracted painfully. Despite everything, he was still my son. Hearing that he was suffering affected me deeply. Did he say anything else? I asked with a trembling voice. He says it's not enough, that even selling the car, he doesn't have enough to pay you. He says you're going to destroy him anyway, so why try? Paige, I don't want to destroy him. I want him to learn. I know, Grandpa, but Dad doesn't see a difference between those two things. After hanging up, I sat in the workshop for hours, surrounded by tools and memories. I thought of the 7-year-old boy who smiled in that photograph. I thought of the teenager who wrote me that apology letter. I thought of all the good times that preceded these dark years. Had I been too harsh? Had I crossed some invisible line between justice and cruelty? On February 11th, 1 day before the final deadline, I received a certified letter. It was from Mark, handwritten on fine paper. I opened it with trembling fingers and read, Father, I sold my car, cancelled the premium office lease, and moved to a more economical shared space. I borrowed money from 3 different friends. I gathered $53,000. It's all I have. It's all I can offer you. I know it's not enough. I know it doesn't cover what I owe you or compensate for the damage caused. I won't plead. I won't cry. But I ask you to consider this as proof that at least I tried. If you decide to proceed with the lawsuit anyway, I will understand. You have won. You made your point. I hope it's worth the price we will all pay. Mark. I read the letter 3 times. There was no explicit apology. There was no clear acknowledgement of his mistakes, but there was something in the words, in the tone, that suggested something had broken inside him. Perhaps not complete remorse, but at least an awareness of consequences. I called Raymond immediately. Mark gathered $53,000. I told him. What do you think? Legally, you can reject it and proceed with a full lawsuit. You are entitled to the full amount plus interest. But Arthur, I must ask you, what do you really want? Absolute justice or a lesson learned? That question resonated in my mind all night. Sophia and I discussed it until dawn. Bethany came from Peoria specifically to advise me. The three perspectives were different, but they all agreed on something. The final decision had to be mine. On February 12th, the deadline, I woke up with absolute clarity about what I would do. I called Raymond at 8 a.m. "I accept the $53,000, I said, but with non-negotiable conditions. What are they? First, Mark must write a formal letter of apology, specifically acknowledging his behavior on Christmas and the mistreatment of the last 2 years. Second, he must attend 3 family therapy sessions with a certified professional paid for by him. Third, Paige remains my exclusive heir until Mark demonstrates a genuine change in his behavior for a minimum of 5 years. Those are tough conditions, Raymond observed. They are fair conditions, I corrected. Raymond drafted the agreement that same morning. He sent it by email to Edward Black at noon. The response arrived 4 hours later. Mark accepted all the conditions. On February 15th, we met at Raymond's office to sign the final agreement. Mark arrived on time, haggard, visibly thinner. He brought an envelope with the apology letter he had written. He handed it to me without looking me in the eyes. I read it there in silence. It said, "Father, I acknowledge that on December 24th, 2024, I unjustifiably humiliated you. My words were cruel and unforgivable. For 2 years, I accepted your generosity without showing adequate gratitude, mistaking your kindness for weakness. I allowed pride and arrogance to destroy our relationship. I do not expect immediate forgiveness, only the opportunity to demonstrate with future actions that I can change. Your son, Mark." It wasn't perfect. There was still a certain emotional distance in the words, but it was real, honest within its limitations, and it explicitly acknowledged the fundamental truth. "I accept the apology," I simply said. "Now, we will both fulfill our part." We signed the agreement. Mark transferred the $53,000 that same afternoon. Raymond verified them and confirmed receipt. Officially, the legal conflict had ended, but the real healing would require much more time. Over the following months, Mark kept his word. He attended the 3 family therapy sessions. It was difficult, uncomfortable, painful for both of us, but necessary. The therapist helped us communicate in ways we had never tried, to express wounds that had remained hidden for decades. I discovered that Mark carried resentments from his childhood that I was completely unaware of. He felt that I was never expressive enough with affection, that my expectations were unattainable, that I always compared him to my idealized father. It didn't justify his behavior, but it explained part of his accumulated anger. And I learned that my silence, which I always considered stoic strength, had been interpreted by Mark as emotional coldness. My inability to verbally express pride had led him to seek validation in the wrong places. We didn't miraculously reconcile. There were no dramatic hugs or declarations of eternal love, but we established something more valuable: mutual respect and clear boundaries. By May 2025, Mark had completely restructured his company. He reduced unnecessary expenses, focused on real profitability over false appearances. His business genuinely began to stabilize. He no longer boasted on social media. He no longer lived beyond his means. Paige came to visit me every 2 weeks. She became the necessary bridge between Mark and me, constantly reminding us why the effort to rebuild what was broken was worthwhile. On December 24th, 2025, exactly 1 year after that terrible night, Mark called me. His voice sounded different, more humble, more genuine. "Father, Christine, Paige and I are having dinner at home tomorrow. Nothing ostentatious, just the four of us. I was wondering if you and Mum would like to join." I looked at Sophia, who was listening to the conversation on speakerphone. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "We'll go," I replied. "But I'm cooking the lamb." I heard something like a stifled laugh on the other end of the line. "Of course, no one cooks lamb like you do." That Christmas was different, quieter, more honest, less perfect, but more real. Mark didn't try to impress anyone. I didn't expect anything beyond basic respect, and in that space of reduced expectations, we found something genuine. When we said goodbye that night, Mark stopped me at the door. "Thank you," he simply said, "for not giving up, for teaching me the hardest lesson of my life." "A father never gives up on his children," I replied, "but he also shouldn't allow them to destroy him." I hugged him then, truly hugged my son for the first time in years, and felt that something in both of us was finally beginning to heal. Today, in 2025, at 68 years old, I understand that true strength is not in enduring silent humiliation. It is in setting boundaries with firm love. It is in demanding respect without hating those who wronged you. It is in teaching consequences without destroying for revenge. Mark and I will never have the perfect relationship I once dreamed of, but we have something better. An honest relationship built on ruins but with stronger foundations than before. And that, I discovered, is enough. Sometimes the deepest love is shown not by yielding, but by standing firm. Not by immediately forgiving, but by demanding real change. Not by forgetting the hurt, but by transforming it into a lesson. That Christmas night that almost destroyed our family ended up saving it, because it taught me that dignity is not negotiable, that respect is not optional, and that even a father's love has necessary limits. I am Arthur Quinn, I am a carpenter, I am a father. And finally, after 68 years, I learned to do both without sacrificing who I am.